Full steam ahead to net zero emissions by 2050. Or is it? Why environmentalists are taking a wait-and-see approach to the latest plans. Taiwan reveals how it's planning to stay connected in case of an internet blackout and what Ukraine has to do with it. A budding friendship. The fourth Lithuanian delegation in just 3 months touches down in the country. And the case is cracked. The unique eating habits of Taiwan's crab-eating mongoose are caught on tape. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Taiwan's state-owned oil company is getting on board with the government's plan to make Taiwan a net zero carbon emitter by 2050. But as John Van Trieste reports, some say the actual impact may not be as big as it seems.
Taiwan's state-run oil company, CPC Corporation, says it's on track to cutting millions of tons of carbon emissions as it looks to switch to hydrogen fuel and shrink its carbon footprint.
1158万公吨，我到去年剩下769万公吨。我这5年提出了34项的计划，花了50亿的经费。2030年要减到585万公吨。
The corporation could bring a hydrogen refueling station online by the end of next year, and it's working with Taiwan's biggest domestic steel company to use hydrogen power in steelmaking. All this is a boost to the government's plan to make Taiwan a net zero carbon emitter by 2050, which has the economic minister upbeat about recent progress.
太阳光电会是有史以来单一年度完成最高的至少有2.5G。那离岸风电预估到今年底的时候，我们会有200只的风机。
But some environment watchers are more reserved, especially when it comes to CPC Corporation's contributions to the plan, pointing out that CPC doesn't include so-called Scope 3 emissions in its emissions numbers.
Scope 3 emission is that when the car driver using this amount of gasoline that will emit the greenhouse gas from their tailpipe. You can not only take into account what is emit in your factory, but also consider what is the emission caused your main product.
Zhao says there are other issues too. Issues like getting Taiwan's energy-intensive industries to decarbonize, all of which means Taiwan's journey to net zero may not be as smooth or easy as it might appear. Alex Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
When Russia cut Ukraine's internet access, Kyiv switched over to a satellite connection. Now, Taiwan's Digital Minister Audrey Tang wants to make sure that if disaster strikes, the country is ready to do the same. Stash Butler reports.
Since Russian missile strikes wrecked Ukraine's internet infrastructure, the country looked to the stars and Elon Musk's Starlink satellite array. Ukraine's military now uses the service to communicate and fight back against the Russian invasion. This has inspired Taiwan's new digital minister, Audrey Tang. She wants to get a satellite connection ready for the country in case a Chinese invasion or natural disaster cuts the internet.
我们也要抢先的在国内700个点，国外3个点先来测试。如果是有重大灾难发生的时候，我们不需要再去设定，我们可以立刻就切换到。
Cybersecurity researcher Lennon Zhang says that's necessary because Taiwan's internet is vulnerable to attack.
The internet that we use in Taiwan rely heavily on the undersea cable. So as you can imagine, if we cut off all the cables, which is around 15, they will be able to cut off all the internet that we use in Taiwan.
Low-orbit satellite internet access is expensive, but it's also flexible and easy to set up on the go. And most importantly, it's tough to knock offline because it relies on hundreds of satellites orbiting rapidly around the planet. It won't be cheap, but Lennon Zhang thinks Taiwan is willing to foot the bill.
If that's for military purpose or for the protection of the national security, I don't think the cost will be an issue here.
As the new digital minister sees it, satellite constellations will offer Taiwan a resilient way of keeping the country online. And from observing developments in Ukraine, officials here know that should China launch an invasion, keeping the country connected will be vital to its defence. Chris Barnes-Butler for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's foreign ministry said Tuesday that Lithuania's first representative office in Taiwan has started operating after its representative arrived in Taipei earlier this month. Taiwan says the office's physical space is still being prepared. Lithuania's economy ministry has told TaiwanPlus there won't be an official opening ceremony. China downgraded relations with Vilnius after Taiwan opened its own office in Lithuania last year. The announcement came as a Lithuanian delegation in Taiwan, the fourth in 3 months. It's led by the country's Vice Minister of Economy and Innovation and includes representatives from laser and biotechnology companies. Beijing reacted angrily last year when Taiwan opened an office in Lithuania called the Taiwanese Representative Office, a departure from the usual convention of using Taipei. China claims Taiwan as its own and viewed the name as a breach of its sovereignty. Louise Watt spoke to Gigantis Bromaitis, a reporter at Lithuania's public broadcaster LRT, about the opening of Lithuania's reciprocal office in Taipei.
How do people in Lithuania feel about the opening of this office? And also, how do they feel about Taiwan more generally?
Obviously, our businesses took part in lots of deals, and they, for I think, last 10 years, put a lot of effort to establish their name, establish their products in China. And when those things with Taiwan happened, when the representative office was opened in Vilnius, everything just changed, and China restricted lots of our businesses, and our shipments couldn't get there. So basically, at first, there was some negative press and negative opinions, especially from businesses. But the things have changed during the beginning of this year, and obviously when a war erupted in Ukraine. Since Russia is really connected to China, and from Lithuania's perspective, they're the allies. The energy prices are skyrocketing. All the prices are skyrocketing. So that was the turning point when people and businesses they started to realize that Russia is not an optimal choice for doing businesses, and regarding that fact, China as well. And lots of businesses actually started to look at Taiwan as a potential market replacement for China.
And could you talk a little about what kind of areas are Lithuanian business people looking to deepen their relationship with Taiwan in?
The main areas, as far as we are told from our government, is high tech, fintech, and obviously foods and goods regarding beverages and food industry. So basically, we're known in the world for our laser technologies, biotechnologies, and obviously Taiwan is known for their microchips and just generally in high tech. So there are lots of common points where we could work together, and our government sees that as a potential and a huge potential.
Are people worried that the opening of this office could bring even more pressure from China on Lithuania?
People don't look at China that she could do any more harm, because our exports are like totally well, there are non-exports basically to China. So I think the thing is that, and the public opinion is that I think there is nothing more to lose with China.
With local elections coming up soon, allegations that the government tried to stall efforts to purchase vaccines during the country's first major COVID surge last year are in the spotlight. The 3 main Taipei mayoral candidates have all weighed in on the issue. Ed Moon has details.
Taiwan's vaccine procurement at the height of the pandemic has become a political issue as the country prepares for upcoming elections. A local charity has indicated that the government tried to block efforts to purchase vaccines last year. Taipei's incumbent deputy mayor, who is now running for the city's top job, has gone a step further, accusing the government of favouring the Taiwan-developed Medigen vaccine at the expense of overseas choices.
其实不是买不到，就是你政府要不要买。你们如果要赚钱，高端什么要赚钱没关系，谋财就好了。但是你不进疫苗，这叫害命。
An official from Tzu, the local charity, says the organisation received several phone calls from government officials who attempted to dissuade them from purchasing the Pfizer-BNT vaccine. That vaccine has been one of the most popular worldwide, spearheading pandemic responses in the US and Europe, among others. But the distribution rights for Asia are held by a Chinese firm. Zhang Wenan, the Taipei candidate from the main opposition Kuomintang, or KMT, says the charity is more credible than the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP.
这就是你要相信慈济还是相信民进党？慈济昨天第一时间也出来还原整个采购的真相，就直指政府有人在阻挡疫苗。
Tzu later seemed to counter their own official, releasing a statement thanking the government for its help in buying the vaccines. The former health minister Chen Shizhong, who oversaw Taiwan's COVID-19 response, is now the ruling party's candidate for Taipei mayor. He says the accusations are false.
对疫苗最关心，希望疫苗早一点进来的，我相信我一定在台湾里面一定是数一数二。我是这个疫情的负责人，疫苗越早进来，对我越有利，对国人越好，所以我不可能去挡疫苗。
Chen's successor in the task force says the allegations are political sniping ahead of the election.
部分人士了哈，那利用这个选举，政治的这个情况哈，去做这些恶意的操作。我认为这个有把时序都混淆了，有一些这个造谣的这个情况，我想这很令人遗憾。
Voters will show who they believe when they cast their ballots on November 26th. James Rayner, Eric Gao, and Ed Moon for TaiwanPlus.
New Zealand has scrapped most COVID-19 measures, ending some of the toughest pandemic rules in the world. All mask-wearing requirements, except for at healthcare and aged care facilities, have been removed. Government vaccine mandates for workers and travellers will be scrapped on September 26th. Much like Taiwan, New Zealand's swift response to the pandemic, including border controls, kept it largely free from the virus until the end of last year. US lawmakers are set to debate a bill on Wednesday that its architects say could radically change US policy toward Taiwan. It's called the Taiwan Policy Act and was sponsored by 2 senators in the US Senate's Foreign Relations Committee. They say the act is designed to promote Taiwan's security and deter Chinese aggression toward it. If passed in its current form, the US would provide Taiwan with $4.5 billion of security assistance over the next 4 years. Designate Taiwan a major non-NATO ally to expedite arms sales, enter negotiations to rename Taiwan's de facto embassy in Washington, currently Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office, to the Taiwan Representative Office. But there's concern among some US officials that the bill could worsen already strained ties with Beijing, which opposes any implicit recognition of Taiwan's sovereignty. To find out more about the Taiwan Policy Act, our reporter James Chater spoke to Blake Herginger, a civilian Indo-Pacific defence policy specialist based in Singapore.
What's the Act's timeline after this markup, and how likely do you think it is to become genuine US policy?
I do not think that we'd see this complete. The draft that's available now will not go forward as an entire policy. There will be pieces that drop out. There's a lot of contention between the legislative and executive branches on Taiwan policy, as we saw with the president and Nancy Pelosi, kind of the public dust-up over her visit. So there will be some haggling and horse trading over what is in this final bill.
What do you think is the most significant aspect of the Act as it currently stands? And is there any part of it which you think is lacking?
One of the big changes is that it offers Taiwan the opportunity to become a foreign military financing recipient for the first time since the Chiang Kai-shek era. To date, For the last 4 decades, Taiwan has purchased arms from the United States through the Foreign Military Sales Program, FMS. So moving them into a recipient status and receiving $4.5 billion in assistance is a big change. I think the effort to shift Taiwan toward foreign military financing does reflect the fact that Congress would like to see money that the United States might be spending spent on priorities that the United States has identified as useful for Taiwan. So not taking over Taiwan's defense policy, but having a bit more agency in where those dollars are spent, as opposed to the sales program, FMS, where Taiwan is effectively just a customer and it's cash on the barrelhead for arms platforms that they want.
There has been some criticism of the act that it's pouring fuel on the fire of already pretty sour relations between Beijing and Washington, given the recent visit of Nancy Pelosi. How would you respond to such a criticism of the act as it stands?
You know, it's been 4 decades since the passage of the Taiwan Relations Act. U.S. policy on Taiwan must adapt to the times, and that is, I think, what Congress is aiming to do. Obviously, this is a high-stakes time for U.S.-China relations, and the Biden administration is highly cognizant of that. They're not ignoring the fact that tensions with Beijing are at a very high point, and that coincides with Beijing's power being far greater than it has been in past crises. And so the president, as the head of state for the United States, it's his foreign policy. He is, you know, the head of the executive branch, but Congress also has foreign relations responsibilities, and they're also the holder of the checkbook. Now, will it inflame relations with the PRC? It certainly could, but I think that there's a recognition of that. But I think any policy going forward needs to take into account where things stand on the ground now.
Coming up, Beijing's hidden influence in Taiwan and how the country is pushing back. Details after the break.
In a changing world, when voices are being silenced, TaiwanPlus is listening. We tell those stories. No compromise, no boundaries,
people in Taiwan.
no fear.
I want to study Chinese. I'm Yin Khvat. Capital Taipei. TaiwanPlus.
TaiwanPlus News.
Welcome back. You're watching Taiwan Plus News. A new report from US-based think tank Freedom House has found that Taiwan is the country that is both the most vulnerable and also the most resilient to Chinese influence campaigns. The report, entitled Beijing's Global Media Influence, examined the Chinese government's media footprint across 30 countries. Taiwan ranks #1 in terms of the Communist Party's penetration of the media landscape, and also first with regards to local efforts to resist that influence. For more on the report's findings, Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick spoke with Freedom House's senior research analyst for China, Hong Kong and Taiwan, Anjali Datt.
China has no physical presence in Taiwan, no diplomats, no media outlets, and few actual correspondents. But your report paints a picture of pervasive, if hidden, influence from Beijing. So what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis?
The way we conducted our methodology was we looked at 5 different influence tactics, and only one of them was the physical presence, the propaganda. And while that's quite a large component of influence in other countries, it was one of the smallest ones in Taiwan. But the different tactics that Beijing is using in Taiwan have penetrated deeply. That includes disinformation campaigns, censorship and intimidation is also a category where Taiwan scored very highly on. And that is related to both local actors intimidating journalists, as well as amongst the big business community issuing statements denying that they support a particular political party based on pressure or fines they've received inside China.
Taiwan is at the top of the table for Beijing's influence efforts, but it scores even higher than that when it comes to local resilience and response. So what are some of the ways that Taiwanese media, civil society, and government of responding and pushing back against us?
We saw really the strongest resilience in Taiwan to the point where, looking at each sector, we found different, very concrete, specific examples. So in the media sector, we found journalists who have a commitment to independently reporting on China. We also saw a strong commitment to everyday resistance, trying to resist pressure to self-censor. There's this kind of underlying resilience that comes from different civil society efforts to promote and protect press freedom, to counter disinformation. There's political awareness, specifically of CCP influence efforts in the media. There's been legislation that has been introduced or discussed, though the political response is still sort of hampered by a lack of cross-party support.
Over the past few years, we've really seen Beijing amplify its military pressure and diplomatic isolation of Taiwan. And there's often a perception that Beijing has almost given up on winning hearts and minds here. But you actually found that over the past few years, particularly over the course of the pandemic, Beijing has actually been stepping up its media influence efforts as well. So how are they taking advantage of these crises over the past few years?
The effort is to try and sow discord in local society, or in the case of Taiwan, to sow discord and unhappiness towards the policies and response of the Taiwanese government to the pandemic. So while in some countries there's more of a focus on positive propaganda, in Taiwan the effort seems to be more to create confusion and political divides and social divides.
About 28 million people are working against their will on any given day. That's according to a new UN report into modern slavery. That figure is an increase of 2.7 million from 2017. The report by the UN's International Labour Organization says the COVID-19 pandemic, armed conflicts and climate change have contributed to the rise. The number includes 3.3 million children in forced labour.
We do not deny that COVID has been a contributor, but we see with forced labour, as by the way we have with child labour, increases which predate the advent of the pandemic. So other things are at work. And I have to tell you that I think, by and large, that we've simply relaxed our efforts. We've taken our eye off the ball when it comes to forced labour, as we have with child labour.
Heavy rain continued to fall in north and eastern Taiwan on Tuesday morning as Typhoon Muifa heads toward China's east coast. The downpours caused a slide in northern Hsinchu County on Monday, temporarily blocking a road. Muifa has also brought wind and rain to Japan's Okinawa prefecture. Officials there warning of wind speeds up to 200 kilometers per hour in the storm's center. Researchers in Taiwan's southern coast of Kending are shell-shocked by the discovery of a local species of mongoose that eats hermit crabs using a special technique. Jaime Ocon has more.
This mongoose, native to Taiwan, is using its front paws to crack open hermit crab shells and eat what's inside. It's not a typical behavior for the animal, but this is the first time it's been recorded here in Taiwan.
它在过去其实也有被记录到敲这个淡水的螺，是在东南亚。那有一些其他虻科的动物在非洲，它也有敲这个剧毒虫，发现敲寄居蟹倒是头一次。
The footage was taken by a research center near Taiwan's southern coast of Kending. One of the researchers noticed that a basket full of empty shells, which the center set up for hermit crabs, was surrounded by damaged shells from which crabs had been eaten.
怀疑是不是有什么人为的破坏，甚至于是不是猴子把它给吃了。我一直想要把它找出真相。后来我架设的录影机竟然拍到了3只食蟹獴。
These types of mongooses live near the center and are protected by the country's Wildlife Protection Act. Hermit crabs, worms, and snakes are all regular sources of food for the animal. But experts believe that changes in their environment have led mongooses to move closer to human habitats in search of food.
食蟹獴原本栖息的溪流都被河川整治，所以导致它们在溪流旁边能吃的东西变少，它们只能往接近城市的地方去移动。市郊又有人养鸡，就是食物的来源。
As the crab-eating mongoose adapts to changes in its environment, This footage of the animal cracking shells is shedding light on its unique eating habits. Patrick Chen and Jaime Okan for TaiwanPlus.
Fall is an exciting time of year for birdwatchers in Taiwan. They've been getting sightings of thousands of Chinese sparrowhawks passing through on their way south for the winter. These sparrowhawks were spotted over the mountains of Taidong County in eastern Taiwan. The country's Wild Bird Society recorded more than 4,000 sightings of the bird over the Mid-Autumn Festival weekend, which concluded on Sunday. Chinese sparrowhawks breed in Taiwan, China and northern parts of East Asia and spend the winter in the warmer tropical climes of the Philippines and Indonesia. Thank you for watching Taiwan Plus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Finally, we leave you with images of moments on the red carpet from this year's Emmy Awards ceremony. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the Taiwan Plus app. Stay safe and see you next time.